we're going to look at how to improve applique settings. You can see, there's a very jagged setting here, but there's a couple of other problems. Like we've got some problems in here as well. But first, let's start with this piece. This piece is jagged because the shape is jagged, which is right in here. In order to control that piece, we would have to punch this a little bit differently. So let me zoom in on it so you can see what's going on. You can see, there's a lot of curving over top. There's some, jagged sections in here. And let me go ahead and change the color of this very quickly because it's very, very difficult to see. And I'm just going to change it to a color that's a little bit easier to see on the screen. Okay, so now you can see a little bit more what's going on here, and that has to do with the way the line was created. You can see, if I go here, you've got a lot of points on this line. And the other thing is we wouldn't necessarily want that applique to be all the way up underneath this candle. It would not, be a very good quality applique. But let's look at doing this a different way and getting a better result. Okay, what I can do with this is I'm going to get rid of all of these lines. And those are the lines that represent where the candle was. And I'm going to go ahead and just hide this for right now. And let's go out of 3D view. So that's out of our way. What I want to do is I want to put an applique underneath here, but I've got a problem. I've got applique stitches that are going to be obviously here. So I'm going to use, my running stitch tools. Those other two lines that I deleted would be fine. But I need to do this in a way that, is going to work better. So I can use the border tool and then I can edit that. Or I can use a line tool and I can just turn that into the satin stitch. I have a couple of different ways of doing this. Let's start with our line tool. Instead of putting any of the satin stitch tools there, or satin stitch pieces there, I'm going to go ahead and make this applique a little bit different. This is going to be, my tack down line. And even though I'm going to have a piece of fabric there, this would be a little more difficult to cut out, but I'll go ahead and do this for these larger pieces because there's no reason for me to double my fabric there. Let's go around the little mouse's face here, and then we come up into this candle section. Trying to trim an applique to this shape would be a little more difficult, so what we're going to do is we're just going to create a straight line across. We're going to come down and we'll just meet. There's our line, and if you need to, backspace a little bit and reset that point. I don't really want to start my stitching up in the corners. That doesn't give you as good a security, but there's my applique line. I'm going to press escape and I'm going to change the color. Change it to colors that mean something to you. In this case, I'm just going to make it like a pale pink. And I'm going to say, I just want it to be a run stitch. Okay, so there's my placement. And, from here I can just use the copy and paste. And, this would now be my tack down, and I'll change the color. We'll make that kind of a happy blue. And I might want to shrink this just a little bit. So go ahead and right click off to the side and see if you can select that piece of applique, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. You might need to zoom in to left click and select that running stitch. Okay, so now I've got that second running line selected, and what I might want to do is just a very tiny bit shrink it inside, just a little tiny bit. And the reason is, this line is going to, be my tack down line. So just a little tiny bit, and to see so you can see what I did, let me go ahead and turn off the image and zoom in around here. This won't work for every single shape, but you can see here's my first line. There's my second line. They're pretty close to each other, but one is just slightly inside, just very slightly inside the other one. Okay, so there are our placement and our tack down lines. Let me turn back on the image. Now I need to create the applique around here. And since I know that the candle's going to probably stitch, pretty early in the design, because the melted wax needs to go over top of it and the mouse needs to go over top of it, I can do something that's a little bit different than the standard applique. This is going to be covering the stitching. This will be covering the stitching. So what I can do is simply use my freehand line, and instead of worrying about trying to make all those jagged edges, I can just center it on here and just create a partial line for the applique. What I want is not to have so much overlap in these satin stitches. So there's my applique line. Then I'm just going to go into my property settings. You can press the space bar, you can use this icon and go into your property settings and go down, and here is my satin border line. This is the line that I want. From there, you're going to look at, here's your satin settings. If it's wide enough, you could technically put a fill in it, but this is not going to be wide. So this is what I want my satin width to be, 3.5, whatever you want that range. You want to leave this number alone for right now because this is wide enough, you don't have to worry about it. And these are the maximum step and minimum step. Those are set pretty good. So all I have to do is say okay, and I now have my applique cover stitch for the candle, because in effect what's going to take place is this would stitch first. And so you can see that the candle is actually covered. Actually, this may stitch first, but you get the point. And I would do the same thing for the mouse's head. If you're going to applique around this, what you don't want is going to be this double applique stitch in here. It makes it just a little bit too heavy. But you do want to applique the mouse's head down. For that, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the lines here for the applique. I'll show you what I would do with the mouse. And the same thing with this hand. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all of these. For the mouse, you can see you already have a partial line there, 2 lines actually coming around the mouse and his hand. But, this goes inside, so you're not going to be able to use that for a tack down. But what I would do for the mouse is, this is really one applique. Unless you plan on making his ears a completely different color, this is one applique. So you can take this and you can applique on, one placement line instead of a bunch of different placement lines. And then you can set this up so that the head stitches a little, differently and stands out, because that's really the only big satin line that you need to be over top. So here's my placement line that I'm creating now, and of course I would be maybe a little bit neater, but this is what I need to do to just have one placement line for the applique. I'm going to close it there, press escape, make sure you change that to a single running line. And I'm going to go ahead and make this pink, because that's my placement color for my lines. I know that that's my placement color for the lines. Now for the tack down, you could use this line as well for the tack down. So that makes that easy enough. You don't necessarily have to sink it inside, but you could if you wanted to. And just copy and paste that on top. And make sure you change the color. Remember, our second placement line was going to be that blue. So, there's my placement, there's my tack down. I would, have the applique in place, and now all I have to worry about really on the cover stitch is going to be around the ears and the head, and I would do those individually. Take your line tool, and you can come up and you can do these ears. Okay, there's an ear. You can come over and you can do these ears, or the second ear, sorry. And then do his little hand or paw around here. So you have those 3 now done. you know, those are, you know, basically going to be satin stitch lines, and they're going to stitch first. So I'm going to press escape, right click, and then select all of them. Go into your settings and say, you know, really I want them to be the border again, and go ahead and say okay, and you can see there's those 3 lines now. You might have to edit a little bit. We'll look and see, you know, like on these pieces here where they meet, we'll look and see what the face cover stitch does first. And let's go ahead and let's change those to a gray color. Maybe that's a little bit light, but we can always come in here and go like this, gray. He's a gray little mouse. Okay, so there they are. There are the cover stitches for the ears and that, and the hand. You can decide how you want to do the face of the mouse. I decided that I would probably do the hat as a cover stitch, and maybe create a little fringe going over onto the ears. But no matter how you do the cover stitch on this mouse, there is something else that you can do. And what you can do is you can select these pieces, all 4 of these, just click on the first one, hold the shift key, click on the last one, and so that you don't have any jumps or, you know, have to create travel stitches, go into your view outline. Those are all going to be shaded. Then you can right click and tell it to merge all of those lines together, and go ahead and generate. And what's going to happen is you have one nice little outline. You might want to change a couple of things, like let's go in here. If that's not how you want, you know, this portion to stitch, then you can always undo the merging and edit those lines. Just bring the ear lines back up to here, and then you don't have to worry so much about, you know, those extending over.